Space, the final frontier. Now, where's my pointer? Not many of us spend a great deal of our time contemplating what's up there in space. But when you realize that the Earth is just a speck of dust in the grand scheme of the universe, I think it's important to find out what's there. And I even think that when we do find out everything that's there, it's going to teach us a hell of a lot about ourselves. But the problem with the subject is it has become very murky. It's very difficult to determine what is real with regard to space exploration, what is fake, and what may have been covered up with regard to space exploration. So this lecture is an attempt to shine a light on those three areas. What's real with regard to space exploration, what is fake, and what might they be covering up. And just bear in mind what I said in part one with regards to wild conspiracies which you will find on the internet. If we go back 10 years with the old Edge Media television, if anyone used to watch that, there was always a battle between the truth and what mainstream say, okay, back and forwards, right? But now it's become, the nature has changed, and it's the internet that's been used for this, right, to discredit people who were doing genuine research, trying to find the truth. Now, some of you might think that when I'm speaking about the space conspiracies, that my views are fairly conservative, right? But I think that's will be because you've been drawn into some of this. So this is an attempt using Occam's razor to point at the truth. All right, so space programs, we can split them down into white world space programs. What do I mean by that? I mean disclosed, things that NASA have mentioned, things that you'll find on Wikipedia. And it includes now an amount of commercial space programs. So private individuals who've got their own companies who are building space rockets. I'll come on to that as well. We can split white world space programs down to real missions and fake missions. We've also got black world, secret space technologies. What is the extent of it? I've no doubt that there are a number of technologies which the public have not been told about, which have been put into spacecraft that are being used now. We've also got possible non-human space programs, extraterrestrial, are there aliens in our skies? And the last two in this list is what you would commonly call the UFO phenomenon. And it's almost impossible to untangle the two, it seems. Because if you have a sighting and you see something very exotic in the sky, how do you know? How do you know whether it's a secret craft or indeed a non-human one? So we look at white world space projects first. Every space project in the white world has used a space rocket to get into space. And this slide shows all of the rockets that have been used in the past. Now, rockets are real. You can go and see them take off. They make a lot of noise, and you can watch them disappear into a tiny dot. And I believe they then orbit the Earth, which is round. We can go and look at the components of a typical space rocket, split into various sections. So the rocket takes off, and when it reaches a certain height and uses all the fuel in the booster stage, it will eject that. It doesn't need it anymore, and that will just drop and fall into the ocean with the booster rockets and the tanks and everything. We then have a smaller rocket with another section here, known as the second stage. That will then get the thing in orbit, but it falls away and it breaks up in the Earth's atmosphere. The spacecraft itself might have solar panels on there, and usually these days they have an interface where they can connect to other spacecraft or the International Space Station. And in the early 1970s, they standardized, both Russia and America, they standardized their interfaces so they can connect to the International Space Station or other space technology. Now, when the rocket returns to the Earth, it's only the crew compartment which will return. Also, all of this is scrapped. This will break up in the Earth's atmosphere. We have a heat shield, because if it's in orbit, it's traveling at an immense speed, and as it comes back through the Earth's atmosphere, a vast amount of heat builds up. When it returns to the Earth, the normal method is to use a parachute. Right? You can watch videos of crew compartments returning to the Earth. You can watch videos of astronauts inside them. They're quite interesting to watch, these videos, if you haven't seen them. and you can see in them that the astronauts are visibly scared often, because sometimes the crew compartment will tumble as it's coming back through the Earth's atmosphere. And then you can watch videos too of the astronauts getting out of their crew compartment, which have this characteristic heat damage on them. So I believe the low Earth rocketry technology is real. Now I've lost count of the amount of times people have emailed me telling me that there's a green screen on the International Space Station, so it can't possibly be real. Now, I've got a green screen in my house, but it doesn't mean my house isn't where I say it is, right? I'd be surprised if there's not a green screen on the ISS. It's full of stuff, right? Media, presentations, etc. You can see the International Space Station with your naked eye. If you look at it through a telescope, you can pick out components on it. If you time its orbital path, you can work out its height using Newton's law of gravitation. So there's no doubt in my mind that it's there and that spacecraft can dock with it. This is the white world space population from 1960. More and more people have gone into space. Low Earth orbit this is. So at any one time, the maximum number of people in space was about 16. So this is white world, what's been acknowledged. So as of the launch of Soyuz, that's the Russian rocket, on the December the 17th, 2017, there have been 318 manned space flights that reached 100 kilometers or more in altitude. That's a low Earth orbit. 320 attempted manned flights with 2 failed attempts, 8 of which were suborbital space flights. 135 of these were shuttle missions. So suborbit is when a craft will go to a height, say 100 kilometers, where it could achieve orbit, but it doesn't. It just comes straight back. It's easier to do that than to go into orbit. I'm prepared to believe that the vast majority, or even all of these missions, were real that have achieved low Earth orbit. So what's my opinion on faking? What are they faking? Well, first, just to mention that I believe that the hardware is real. So with the Apollo hardware, you can go to a museum, you can see it, you can touch it, it works. And with regards to the unmanned missions, even the rovers, the Mars rovers, they did build those things and they are real. So the hardware is real. On some occasions, what they claim was achieved using that hardware is untrue. Also, images from some missions may have been changed, doctored, or completely suppressed. All right, so that's my opinion on faking. And as I said earlier, some of you might think that's a conservative view, but it is an attempt to aim at the truth. Now, I'm going to exclude Apollo from this next analysis. So I'm going to consider all moon exploration apart from the manned Apollo missions, because I think there's vast amount of evidence to suggest that they didn't happen. Right? So I'm going to ask a question. Between 1958 and 1976, there have been how many attempted moon missions? So this is when they've built a rocket, they've attempted to launch it, and then launch a craft to go and look at the moon. How many attempts up to 1976? Anyone care to guess? None. Yeah. Everything's fake. Right, okay, the official figure is 79. Of those, 29 were American and 50 Russian. We can break that down. So of those, 14 of the American missions failed, 26 Russian missions failed. So I'm including in that when they've built a rocket and the rocket's blown up on the launch pad, or it's lost the craft when it's reached Earth orbit or something. So attempted missions. We've had 3 partial fails for each. So that means that just 12 of the American missions, 12 of 29 were successful, and 21 of the Russian missions were successful. This is unmanned. Nobody in these craft. Right. Now look at that table. That table, in my opinion, tells you the motive why they faked the Apollo missions. If you consider a manned mission, it is several times more difficult than an unmanned mission. You've got to have space for the astronauts. You've got to regulate the air with the right amount of oxygen at the right temperature. You've got to make sure that the craft doesn't go through certain G-forces that will kill people. And you've got to get the thing back to the Earth, right? These are one-way missions, right? So you've got to get the thing all the way back from the moon's surface through the Earth's atmosphere and land safely without killing anyone. Several times more difficult. Would you get in a spacecraft with that reliability? Right? That, to me, explains why they hoaxed the Apollo missions, because the technology was nowhere near reliable enough, right? They did not want to put 3 men into a rocket, which did exist. It's a real rocket, and it can go in low Earth orbit. It could probably even head off towards the moon, right? But they did not want to do that with a 1% chance of getting those 3 guys back alive and have to announce to the world, hey, they've suffocated in space. We don't know where they are, right? That tells you the motive. Okay, now we can break these successful missions down into impactors, flyby missions, orbiters. So an impactor is where the craft just smashes straight into the moon's surface and maybe sends back a few images. Flyby mission, zips straight past the moon, perhaps sending back a few images. We've got a number of orbiters and landers, sample and return missions. I've got no reason to believe that these are fake. I don't see evidence of faking in these missions. So here are some of the technology that's been used. The top row is Russian, the bottom is American, so we've got impactors, flyby, orbiters, and landers. Here on the left is a Russian rover mission, and on the right a sample and return mission. So there's a tiny rocket on the top there. They take a sample of soil, and that then gets back to the Earth. But as I say, much, much easier than getting astronauts back to the Earth. Now then, we see that in the 1960s, America had put 3 orbiters taking high-definition images, and these were known as the lunar orbiters. So Lunar Orbiter 1, 42 high-resolution and 187 medium-resolution frames were taken and transmitted to Earth, covering over 5 million square kilometers of the moon's surface, although a number of the early high-resolution images showed severe smearing. Showed severe smearing. What does that mean? Now, this is the coverage that probe took photos of. So we see the far side, about 50% of the moon's surface was photographed. And you need to point out that when the moon goes around the Earth, it always presents one face to the Earth. So there's an entire side of the moon that we never see from the Earth. We cannot see it. The only way to see it is to get in a spacecraft and then go and look behind it. So this craft was photographing that hidden side for the first time, and it took photographs of about half of the surface. Here's a photograph at NASA of them laying out these images of the moon's far side. Now, one person who claims that he saw some of those lunar orbiter high-definition images is Carl Wolf. He was an engineer, and he allegedly went to an installation where he was trying to fix something, and he was shown, right, these images of the far side of the moon. Many of you have probably seen this clip. I've showed it on Rich Planet loads of times, but I'm going to show it again in this presentation.
Good morning. My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. Dr. Colley was in charge of that project. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. It didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. A airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an airman second class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. Asked the young man if he'd describe the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
Now then, throughout that statement, he's using the pronoun I with past tense verbs. And I think if I was to transcribe it and give it to Peter Hyatt, he would say this guy is honest. He's telling the truth. Now, and bear in mind what Wikipedia tells us about those photographs, that they showed severe smearing. So was that an attempt to cover up what Carl Wolf had witnessed? Now, you would imagine, let's just say what Carl Wolf says is true, that on the hidden side of the moon there are structures. You would imagine they would want to go and investigate that with rovers or landers. And it's interesting to point out that the Apollo missions, I've put Apollo missions in quotes there, we take that with a pinch of salt, Apollo missions and all robotic landers so far have landed only on the near side of the moon so that they can communicate continuously with Earth while on the lunar surface. So the yellow triangles there are the NASA unmanned missions, the green is the alleged Apollo missions, and the red is the Russian unmanned missions. So it's fascinating that they've never, to date, landed anything in the white world on the far side of the moon. But I suspect that they may well have done in secret and not told anyone about it. So, structures on the moon. A number of commentators talk about this subject and will show you photographs of the moon where they say, well, this has been smeared, they've rubbed something out there. It perhaps shows a building or a mine or what have you. Now, some of those researchers look at Apollo record or Apollo images. Now, that is flawed in my opinion because they're actually looking at images of a studio and finding anomalies in the studio set, right? However, some of the images which I would suggest are genuinely of the moon do show anomalies. And I would like to introduce Andrew Johnson's new book at this point. Now, Andrew's written this new book, Secrets in the Solar System, and we will be discussing it on Rich Planet in future shows. And he doesn't just cover the moon, he covers Mars and the various moons and everything within the solar system, basically. And he's looking at it with the eye to, well, have they covered anything up? Is there something we've missed, etc.? So he concludes on the moon. I have spent a considerable number of additional hours trying to find out more information about the moon anomalies and more imagery of them. I can't say that I feel I have seen anything which looks to have been obviously constructed. So with regards to the images that they've released, Andrew, the jury is out for him on whether they show artificiality, right? Now, let's come on to Mars. Much more difficult to get to. Those probes typically take 3 days to get to the moon. You're talking 6 months to get one to Mars. Now, do bear in mind this work on the Mars rovers, which I had a great deal of help by Douglas Gibson, who's here tonight, and it sheds huge doubt on whether the Mars rovers and landers are sending back images from Mars. I would challenge anyone to read this and believe that the Mars rover images are of Mars. I suspect that they are, in fact, coming from remote parts of the Earth. But there's a lot of evidence in there with wildlife images, plant life images, microbial life, fossil images, etc. Okay, so let's go on to these Mars exploration missions. So between 1960 to the present day, there have been 47 attempted Mars missions, unmanned. I'm not including Phobos in this. Now, of those, 22 were American, there were 18 Russian, 7 others, including the European Space Agency. Of those, 5 American failed, and a lot of the Russian missions failed and partially failed. So it's interesting to note that there have not been any fully successful missions by Russia to investigate Mars. If we break down the successful missions, we've got a number of flyby craft, 5 orbiters that America have put there. I've put the landers and rovers in purple because I'm dubious as to whether they're, as I say, sending back images from the Earth or from Mars. We'll come back to that in a second. So let's look at the orbiters. And as I said, as with the moon orbiters, I don't have any evidence or reason to believe that they're fake. There are people who I know will refute that. But let's go down the avenue that they're real. So these are all of the orbiters that have successfully, not just orbiters, some of them are flyby missions, that have successfully reached and sent data back from Mars. So from 1965 up to 2016. Now, it wasn't until the Viking missions in 1976 when there was great excitement occurred when one particular image was released by NASA. And that was the famous face on Mars. So we see it here. And just to put a scale on it, this is about a mile long. So when this image was released by NASA, people got very excited saying, wow, this is some sort of monument. It's been constructed by someone. It's there on the surface of Mars staring into space. It wasn't just this image. The surrounding area known as Cydonia, some people claim showed pyramids, albeit in state of extreme ruin. Other anomalies as well, such as craters which make no sense, look more like mines, etc. Now, interesting to note that NASA immediately debunked this after they put it out. And they lied when they debunked it. Because they said, well, the craft flew over the face a second time several hours later, and when it did, there was no face there. That was a lie, because the craft was nowhere near the face several hours later. This is Dr. Jerry Soffen of NASA. So why does NASA feel the need to lie in order to debunk this evidence? Here's a wider shot. You see the face here. So there were a number of scientists who became very interested in these images from Viking. And they were keen to get more high-definition images from a later probe. And that group called itself the Mars Investigation Team and contained some credible scientists with PhDs in astronomy and physics. We'll come on to that in a second. Now we see that the next successful mission after the Viking missions wasn't until over 20 years later. So these scientists who believed that Cydonia showed possible evidence of artificiality, they were kept waiting for over 20 years for more high-definition images. Now there was a craft which went to Mars in 1993 known as the Mars Observer, and it was due to go into orbit on the 24th of August. It had a brand new camera system on it capable of taking better images than the Viking craft. And the group that were interested, this is a group outside of NASA. NASA were not interested in these anomalies, it's just a bunch of rocks. But this independent group were very interested in Cydonia, and they wrote this report in 1993. And on the cover it states, on the failure of executive, congressional, and scientific responsibility in investigating possible evidence of artificial structures on the surface of Mars and in setting mission priorities for NASA's Mars exploration. So, as this craft is hurtling towards Mars, this group of scientists is getting quite excited. And one of them, Richard Hoagland, although he's not a scientist, he appeared on television and, putting the case, NASA, you need to be photographing Cydonia and sending these scientists high-definition images. Not long after that TV program aired, communication was lost with this craft, just 3 days before it's due to go into orbit. And some people have suggested that the mission was hijacked and it went into the black, possibly taken over by the military, but we don't really know. It's interesting also to note that around this time, in January 1994, the military launched their own probe to take photographs of the moon. So this was not a NASA project, it was a Pentagon project called Clementine. Now Clementine was due to release high-definition images of the moon, because this craft, it photographed the entire moon surface in high definition using different types of camera, and they were due to hold a press conference in 1994, and that press conference was put back 2 whole years, right, before they released the images. So what are they hiding? Is the Clementine mission linked in some way to the failure of the Mars Observer? All right, so McDaniel formed the Society for Planetary SETI Research, a multidisciplinary group of scientists and other professionals interested in search for analysis and evaluation of possible evidence of extraterrestrial artifacts in the solar system. So this was a credible group of scientists who weren't happy with NASA, and they weren't just looking at Mars. Okay, so the next craft which got to Mars and started sending back data was the Mars Global Surveyor. Now, some of the scientists commented when the images were released that they felt NASA were taking images in deliberately bad lighting conditions, and that even some of the data had been tampered with. They weren't happy with the images from this craft. And this is a list of all the scientists who, at that time, either believed Cydonia was artificial and had been built by some group, or felt that the evidence strongly pointed in that direction. Right? So we've got PhDs in astronomy, degrees in physics. So these are not space enthusiasts, as the European Space Agency tried to describe them as. These are top physicists, okay? Now, two of those scientists spoke at a press conference in May 2001. I wasn't aware of this press conference. Andrew Johnson sent me an email with a link to it, and he wasn't aware of it until fairly recently. So somehow it's been kept off the internet. And in that press conference, Dr. Brian O'Leary, who was a NASA astronaut, I think his degree in physics, PhD in astronomy, and Dr. Tom Van Flandern spoke about the Mars anomalies and were discussing the artificiality. Brian O'Leary essentially lost his career at NASA when he started getting interested in Mars anomalies. So I'm going to show you a clip from this conference. All these three guys are dead now, by the way, but just have a look at this clip.
Tom and I each pursued mainstream careers in astronomy research, publishing dozens and dozens of peer-reviewed papers in our fields, until the 1980s, when we independently began to address promising but unsupported topics, such as the Mars anomalies. In 1976, the Mars Viking orbiter imaged a mile-long mesa that resembles a human face staring straight up into space. The spacecraft also imaged other objects of interest in the surrounding areas. In the presentation you're about to hear, Dr. Van Flandern will be showing you some provocative images from the ongoing Mars Global Surveyor mission.
In this high-resolution photo taken in 1998, the face was again imaged. When that image was released to the media on April 5th, 1998, this is the image that the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, released. Anyone would agree is a very natural-looking object. It does look like a pile of rocks and make the face look like an accident. The trouble is that it doesn't look anything like the previous image, and there's an even bigger problem for the scientists. It doesn't look like the data that came down from the spacecraft either, and that's a more serious problem, the data that this image was based on. Well, on the JPL website that is cited in the press kit, you can go there and you can see this image and the actual image that it was based on, side by side, and the recipe for how JPL got from one to the other. They put the actual image through a high-pass filter, then through a low-pass filter, then they averaged the two to get this image. When we go back to the actual image was taken at a rather oblique angle under extremely unfavorable lighting conditions. But because we have the older images from a different angle, we can triangulate, and computers processing programs are very good now at reproducing lighting from any angle. So we can use those computer techniques with the actual data. And this is done by a computer, not by an artist. There is no introduction of new data in this image by any artist. It is just rearranging the features you see by computer instructions to restore a high angle of lighting, put the shadows in the right place, and to restore an overhead view from this oblique view to one side. And here's what happens when we do that. There's the lighting restored, and now we rotate to a view from above. And this is what the object actually looks like, as best we can tell at this point.
All right, so the image on the left is what it actually looks like, and the image on the right is what NASA want you to think it looks like. I think we can accuse them of a cover-up. It's the border that fascinates me, the uniformity of the curve around here and the sides. Now, what Van Flandern points out in his lecture is that in the Viking images, you were unable to make out irises, eyebrows, or nostrils. I mean, look at the nostrils or lips. And because they were predicted before these images, he's worked out a probability of the thing being just random. So he's saying that the size, shape, location, and orientation of eyebrow, nostrils, iris, and lips. The natural origin hypothesis is disproved at odds of 1,000 billion to 1. The artificiality of Cydonia is established beyond a reasonable doubt. So this credible scientist is saying that that has been built by some ancient civilization, we don't know how long ago. And he also points out that he believes the equator on Mars used to be in a different orientation, and that the face, when it was built to line up with the equator. But there's other evidence as well in this area. There's the D&M pyramid and other possible pyramids on Mars. Now, there have been a number of missions since that mission, since the Mars Global Surveyor. Some of them have taken high-definition images of Cydonia, but none of them really have produced anything which surpasses what Tom Van Flandern said there. And I would argue that the remit of the organizations that have been sending these subsequent probes has been to play the evidence down. Right? I don't think we can trust them. As I said, the European Space Agency called that group a bunch of space enthusiasts. So I think there's been a policy to play down the whole significance of Cydonia. Now then, I just want you to consider, let's assume that there is an artificial area on Mars, and I believe that there is. They've not told anyone about it, and they've been very careful to debunk it and play it down and ridicule it. So I suspect that that has been investigated in secret, that at that time there was a project to either send manned or unmanned missions to investigate what's there on the ground. Now think about that, right? It would be no good just sending a clandestine mission to examine Cydonia, would it? Because there could be artifacts all over the surface of Mars from an ancient civilization, right? Just because you can see things from space doesn't mean that there aren't artifacts all the way around the planet. These are just the things they can see from orbit. So they would need to search with a fine-tooth comb using rovers or even manned missions, who knows, right? The entire planet. We're talking a planet. How long would that take? It's going to take a long time. And you're not going to want NASA sending white world missions to the surface of Mars that might find things on that planet. If it's a cover-up, it means the Mars rovers is a lie. And that would explain why we're getting images from the Earth. So in other words, the controversy around Cydonia and the possible clandestine investigation of what's really on the surface of Mars might explain the phony images that we're getting back from the rovers. So Andrew Johnson concludes in his book on Mars, his book on the solar system, in the chapter on Mars, he says, I do think NASA is hiding something about the face and Cydonia, and it is something important. Their behavior and reaction towards those who have done investigations strongly indicates that someone knows a lot more than they will reveal. If I was pushed, I'd say that some of these pyramidal structures are indeed artificial, and there is some kind of link between these structures and the pyramids on Earth. Okay, let's look at the commercial aspect of white world space programs now, because as I said, there's a number of individuals who've got their own companies who have built space rockets. These are the key players, and I'm going to go through them. There are a number of companies that send satellites into orbit using their own rockets, but they're not trying to put people into space. First, just to point out the kind of money that you need in order to build a space rocket. So the new NASA space rocket is known as Orion. That has a budget of $3.7 billion. A space shuttle typically would cost $1.7 billion to build. So Bob Bigelow, Bigelow Aerospace, he's worth $1 billion. Branson is worth $5 billion. Elon Musk, who made all his money from PayPal, he is worth $20 billion. And Jeff Bezos, Blue Origin is his rocket company, he's worth $130 billion. He owns Amazon. So most of us in this room have probably contributed to these two guys' wealth. Reported as the richest man in the world fairly recently. So they're building their own space rockets. Now, I'm going to go through them and look at them. Now, Bob Bigelow is often championed on Coast to Coast Radio as being this incredible entrepreneur who's got these two spacecraft in orbit around the Earth. Well, let's just spell out what he actually did. He made a capsule. Inside that was a blow-up inflatable spaceship. He gave that to the Russians, who put it on top of one of their rockets. So he didn't build a rocket. They put it in orbit around the Earth, and then at some point the thing blows up and inflates, about 14 feet long by 8 feet diameter. So it's like an old-fashioned airship, like a small airship, and it's in orbit around the Earth. He's got two of them, right? No one inside it. he put cockroaches and some jumping beans in there. I'm not lying, that's what he put in one of them. Not a serious contender in my opinion, right? Now Richard Branson, he's building a plane, right? Now that plane, when it comes back, it hasn't reached space yet, but when it does, when it comes back, it actually acts as a glider, so there's no power to it at all. It glides down with no power. When it gets into space, it's taken up to 50,000 feet by 2 other aircraft, it's dropped, the rocket engine comes on, and then that rocket engine then gets it into space. One person has died in the development of it. You couldn't land it on another body, on the moon or anywhere, because it needs a runway. So it's a fancy aircraft really that's going to get space tourism going. So you can pay a lot of money and go and see the curvature of the Earth. I wouldn't get in it, let's put it that way. Again, I don't think it's really as serious as the next two, which I'm going to look at now. Okay, so with regards to Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, what have they achieved? Right, they've both developed their own rocket engines and their own range of rockets. They've got 2 or 3 different sized rockets. Now, let me just illustrate the big thing that they're both trying to do. They're trying to create reusable rockets, right? So their rockets, as I said earlier, when the rocket takes off, the booster stage rocket with NASA would just end up in the ocean, it would be binned. So what they're trying to do, they both use the same argument. They say when you go on holiday in a plane, you don't throw the plane away. You don't use it once. We need to be able to reuse these rockets if we're going to make spaceflight commercially viable. So they're saying, well, we're going to save the booster rocket. So what happens is, before all of the fuel is used, it separates from the craft and then it reverse lands. So it goes back, still firing its booster rocket, and it lands either where it's taken off from or on a platform in the sea. So they reuse this section. Now Bezos is alleged to have reused a booster rocket 4 times, the same booster rocket, and Musk, I think he's reused his booster rocket once. Now Bezos hasn't achieved Earth orbit with his rockets. He just goes up into a suborbit, straight up and then straight back. With Musk, he seems to be further forward in terms of Earth orbit. Now one thing that Musk said, I think originally, was the second stage rocket, he was going to reverse land that and then use that again. I think he's given up on that. It's too difficult because it gets much higher above the Earth and it breaks up in the Earth's atmosphere. It's technically too difficult to reverse park the second stage rocket. So when the thing comes back to the Earth, this service cargo compartment, they can't save that either. So the big idea that both these guys are looking at is to save the booster rocket to use it again and save the crew compartment. I think Musk has recovered a number of crew compartments. Now Musk has docked his rockets with the International Space Station, I think something like 13 times, and then returned the crew compartment back to the Earth, either with taking cargo up there or back. He hasn't put any people in there. There's no private commercial venture put a person in space yet. But you're probably going to hear that maybe in the next year or few years, and it'll be trumpeted massively in the mainstream media, and this will be trumpeted. We've reused a booster rocket, right? So we're going to reduce the price of space travel. Now then, what's planned for the immediate future? As I've stated, they're both trying to put people in space. Space tourism. Now, with Musk, he comes out with what I would say are wild pipe dream claims. He says he wants to colonize Mars. Right, now with rocket technology, I would suggest that's impossible. You need different propulsion system in order to achieve that. Let me explain. Now rockets, as their principle of operation, use Newton's third law. Newton's third law states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So a rocket will spew out at extreme speed and pressure mass, and the reaction then pushes the thing forward. Your car actually uses Newton's third law as well. So when your engine turns the wheels push against the road, and the road pushes back, your car moves forward. So it's an action and a reaction. Boats use Newton's third law. They push against the water. Helicopters use Newton's third law. They're pushing against the air. So with Newton's third law propulsion, you always need something to push against to move your craft forward. Now the thing with rockets is, they are taking with them all that stuff that they need to push against, because when you get into space, there's nothing to push against. If you're in space, you can't move, because there's nothing to push against, right? So a rocket takes with it all that stuff so it can chuck it out that way so it moves that way, right? It's a bit like with a car taking the road with you so that your car still works in space. That's how archaic space rockets are. What is required for, well, how can I put it, valid space travel is to be able to produce an acceleration on your craft without ejecting mass, right? Now, this is the holy grail of space propulsion, and it has been achieved. Some people would say, no, you can't do that. You can't make an object accelerate without using Newton's third law. Well, no, you can. If I walk to the top of a very tall building and I'll step off the building, I will accelerate down to the ground without ejecting mass. Well, I might be ejecting mass, but not in a physics sense. So why have I accelerated? Well, I've accelerated because I am inside a gravitational field. The field has accelerated me. It's not used Newton's third law, right? Now, the subject of electrogravitics, I suggest you research it, because in 1929, Thomas Townsend Brown invented a gravitator, and he used very high voltage to produce acceleration on an object without ejecting mass. And in the mid-1950s, he demonstrated it in a vacuum. These discs, which, as I say, were demonstrated in a vacuum, which means they're not pushing against the air. Now, if you can create enough acceleration on your object without ejecting mass to get it to levitate, turn it up a bit more, it will move at its fixed velocity, and you'll be in space in no time. Very simply, much easier than a rocket. The thing with a rocket is it takes so much mass with it, because every time it needs to change direction in space, it's got to spew out a load of mass. Turn around, spew out mass. Rocket travel is archaic, right? You need a technology, field propulsion, electrogravitics. We've got Eugene Podkletnov, who used superconductors. He's demonstrated it. Ed Fouché, who talks about superfluids, superconductive superfluids, right? This is technology which is in the black, and it went into the black in 1957. I'm going to come on to that. I'm going to come on to the black technology in a second. Now, so you ask the question, why doesn't Elon Musk talk about non-rocket-based propulsion? Both these guys are engineers, right? They're clever guys. They're both electrical engineers, and they're both at the front end in terms of the rocket development. They're not entrepreneurs that just sit back counting money, right? They both understand how the rockets work, but none of them talk about non-rocket-based propulsion system. This guy's got $130 billion, right? He sells $1 billion of his shares every year. Wouldn't you think he would put something into non-rocket technologies, or at least investigate it? So I've looked at both of them. I can't find anything obvious which suggests that Jeff Bezos is a gatekeeper, although he's obsessed with rockets and nothing else. This project here, he's speaking to these school children, and it's a project where they've gone around the oceans digging up NASA's old rocket engines and polished them up a bit and put them on display and gone, ooh, there's a rocket, right? So he comes out with these mottos like slow is smooth and smooth is fast, the tortoise always wins. So his philosophy is very, very slow incremental development of his rockets. He's not interested in anything new. Now here he is, sitting next to Michael Collins. Michael Collins is the man who allegedly went to the moon with Neil Armstrong, right? So in my opinion, Michael Collins knows fine well they didn't land on the moon, right? Now, Jeff Bezos in this clip, he's talking about the Apollo missions. He's a guy who's put his own rockets into suborbit, right? And he's reused the booster rocket, as I explained earlier. He's very well up on rocketry. He knows how difficult it is to do. So he knows how difficult it is to get to the moon. And just listen to what he says here, sitting next to Michael Collins.
I think if you think back to the kind of the heyday of the 1960s and the Apollo program and all of that excitement, my gut instinct on this is that we as a civilization, we as humanity, pulled that moon landing way forward, out of sequence from where it actually should have been. It was a gigantic effort with what is, in many ways, it should have been impossible. And they pulled it off with barely any computational power. They were still using slide rules. They couldn't numerically model in computers a lot of these important processes like combustion inside a rocket engine, which is still hard today, but we can do it a little bit. They didn't have computational fluid dynamics to really, everything had to be done in a wind tunnel. Nothing could be done on a computer. So I think the reason we've sort of taken a hiatus, maybe in part at least, is because we pulled that forward to a time when it should have been impossible. And then once it was done, we kind of had to wait and let technology catch up.
This is an intelligent guy. He's in denial. Yeah, he's in denial. He can't admit it to himself because his view of the world would have to change too much. Elon Musk is a different kettle of fish, I think. Now, as I mentioned, their big idea, right, is reusable rockets. Right? That's what he mentions that at the beginning of this clip, but then he's asked the key question after he's trumpeted his reusable rocket.
Reusability is really, I think, the critical breakthrough needed in rocketry to take things to the next level.
Let's talk about Mars. That's what really excites a lot of the people in the audience, a lot excites many of us. How are we going to get there? First of all, what are in your mind, say, 2, 3 top technologies that we need to develop, that we need to improve to get us closer to where we want to be?
Yeah. Right, that's a great question. What are the technologies we need if we are going to build craft to get to Mars? My answer would be, very simply, we need technology that can accelerate a craft without ejecting mass. I'm pretty sure they've got it in the black world. We need to get it out into the white world and release it for use in my spacecraft. That's what my answer would be.
Key technologies. I mean, obviously it'd be great to have some sort of fundamental new thing that has never existed before and like pushes the boundaries of physics. That would be great. But as far as the physics that we know today, I think I actually think we've got the basic ingredients are there. Like I mean, if you do a densified Methalox rocket with on-orbit refueling, Earth orbit refueling, so you like load the spacecraft into orbit, and then you send a bunch of refueling missions to fill up the tanks, and you have the Mars colonial fleet essentially that gets built up during the
analogy I gave earlier about taking the road with you, yeah, that's what he's describing there. That they have to have several missions just to get all the fuel into space.
Time between the Earth-Mars synchronizations, which occur every 26 months, and then the fleet sort of all departs at the optimal transfer point. I think we don't need anything like we don't need any sort of thing that people don't already know about. I believe we've got the building blocks. But
now then, Peter Hyatt would have a field day with that statement. He's used 3 negatives within 2 sentences, right? So that means we're on high alert for deception. He's probably lying, right? So now listen, he stutters on the pronoun I, which means he's under stress. His eyes are all over the place. He says, we don't need any sort of thing that people don't already know about. Now, what is he talking about, people? Does he mean the public? Let's assume he means the public and restate that. We don't need any sort of thing that the public don't already know about. Not that hasn't been invented, right? I think he slipped up here with this statement. I think he knows all about the secretized technologies. I think he knows fine well his rockets are just a cover for far more advanced technology. And the same applies with his views on energy, because he owns an energy company as well. And his solution to the energy crisis is solar panels and batteries. With his car company, he states that all transport, not just cars, will be electric and will be autonomous. So we're not going to have steering wheels in 15 to 20 years, according to Elon Musk. He supports Agenda 21 globalist type thinking. He's always using the buzzwords of renewable and sustainable. Now then, I'm going to go off on a tangent here and talk about artificial intelligence, because this guy spends a lot of time fear-mongering about artificial intelligence. Now, I'm reasonably well qualified to talk about artificial intelligence. I spent 12 years programming microprocessors. Some of those applications that I worked on were safety critical. So if the system fails, someone is going to die. So nuclear power, nuclear weapons, motorway control systems. Now in a safety critical control system, you design it with certain principles in mind. One of those is the system must be deterministic, right? So you must always know where that system is going to be. So we use things called state transition diagrams in order to define the system. And no matter what happens in the outside world, your system will always be in a known configuration or state. You don't introduce randomness. You would never put artificial intelligence into a safety critical system where lives could be at risk, right? He's an engineer, he should know that. Now the other person who's been fear-mongering, or before he died, about artificial intelligence is Stephen Hawking. Now let's just say that whoever this is a real physicist. He's not qualified to talk about artificial intelligence. He writes equations about black holes. Now that might sound clever, but it doesn't mean that he knows anything about microprocessors, software design, system design, or engineering, right? He's no more qualified than a hairdresser to talk about artificial intelligence. So why is he fear-mongering about it? Seems to me we've got these two fake role models either side of the Atlantic fear-mongering for some reason about artificial intelligence. Musk mentions it at the end of this clip.
Well, first of all, I should say I'm a big fan of NASA. NASA does a lot of good things for which it doesn't get enough credit, and that the public, I guess, doesn't know that much about. But there's great things in terms of the telescopes like the Hubble and the James Webb and the rovers on Mars. And SpaceX is about helping make life multiplanetary and doing what we can to continue the dream of Apollo and ultimately make a contribution to life becoming multiplanetary. People talk a lot about fusion and all that, but the sun is a giant fusion reactor in the sky, and it's really reliable. It comes up every day. So if it doesn't, we've got bigger problems. There's no question in our mind whatsoever that all transport, with the ironic exception of rockets, will go fully electric. Everything. Planes, trains, automobiles. Well, a lot of trains are already electric. All ships.
How much do you see artificial intelligence coming into the workplace?
I think people should be really concerned about it. I keep sounding the alarm bell, but until people see like robots going down the street killing people, like they don't know how to react, because it seems so ethereal. AI is a fundamental risk to the existence of human civilization, in a way that car accidents, airplane crashes, faulty drugs, or bad food were not. They were harmful to a set of individuals within society, of course, but they were not harmful to society as a whole. AI is a fundamental existential risk for human civilization, and I don't think people fully appreciate that. Is kind of a deep intelligence in the network. You say, well, what harm could a deep intelligence in the network do? So, well, it could start a war by doing fake news and spoofing email accounts and fake press releases, and just by manipulating information. The pen is mightier than the sword. As an example, I want to emphasize, I do not think this actually occurred. This is purely a hypothetical that I'm digging my grave here. But there was that second Malaysian airliner that was shot down on the Ukrainian-Russian border, and that really amplified tensions between Russia and the EU in a massive way. Well, let's say if you had an AI that was where the AI's goal was to maximize the value of a portfolio of stocks. One of the ways to maximize value would be to go long on defense, short on consumer, start a war. And then how could it do that? Well, hacked into the Malaysian Airlines aircraft routing server, route it over a war zone, then send an anonymous tip that an enemy aircraft is flying overhead right now.
So who is this guy? Who is he working for? Now, remember this slide I had up in part 1, creating a patsy? You can fool them, kill them, mind control them, impersonate them, as we possibly saw with Tommy Mayer. I can add one to my list now. We can invent them using software, our patsies. Now, if we just look at the things that he's mentioning, right, we've got a space company, which in my opinion is masking the secret space program, space technology which has been hidden. He's talking about Agenda 21 with his energy company, right? That's another big agenda on Earth. But also he's now talking about false flag terror. So is the group which manages those 3 areas connected? And is he their monkey? Now, so just to summarize on space exploration, I believe that there have been previous civilizations or other civilizations before us, perhaps before the 250,000 year age that they say we are. I believe that those civilizations have either been to or been on the moon and Mars. I believe there are remnants of those civilizations on these planets, and I believe that they are being investigated in secret and that you are being kept in the dark about it, with the help of people like Elon Musk. So let's come on to the black world or secret space programs. And as I said, very difficult to sort of separate out whether something is ET or just very exotic black world craft. Now let's just mention someone who speaks about secret aircraft first. This is Michael Schratt, who I communicated with recently, and he speaks at these secret space program conferences. He's like a walking encyclopedia of these secret aircraft. Now one of the things that he spoke about a number of years ago, I featured in one of my films, this sort of small triangular craft. This is a man-made craft. It had people in it, right? But it crashed in East Germany, and special forces were sent to recover it. So listen carefully to what he says about this secret aircraft. This is in 1989.
The only known illustration of a top secret aircraft that crashed in the East German border region during the first month of the Bush Senior administration. Had a crew of 2 that sat tandem. Now, I'm proposing that this was a Lockheed design just for the fact that you can see the same faceted flat plate technology used on the F-117. It had 3 balls. There were 2 up front, 1 in the aft section, and when this particular aircraft crashed, that you'll see right here, there was a hull breach on the port side, and then near the aft section of the hull, there was a crack or bent at about a 15-degree angle. One of these balls popped out, was later recovered by crew. It had the consistency of a pineapple or a seashell, and there was a interesting gold braid embedded into these balls. And when these gentlemen recovered one of these spheres and they put this box around it, this box actually popped up on its own. So it had some residual effects still going on.
Right then. This is the drawings that Michael Schratt made, and he got the information, I found out. He got it from Mark McCandlish, but Schratt drew these drawings. Now look at this. There's no wings here, right? So it's not using the air to stay off the ground. It's not using Newton's third law. There's no rocket engine, right? The balls are the propulsion system. And the reason why they're laid out in a triangle is to give it stability. So I would imagine these balls are about this sort of size. They, or what I was talking about earlier, can provide acceleration on an object without ejecting mass. So that thing can just levitate, right? You turn that up and it'll be in space in half an hour, right? Although Michael Schratt describes this as an aircraft, I suspect it might be a spacecraft. Or if it's not a spacecraft, it wouldn't take much tweaking to make that into a spacecraft, right? And we are meant to be impressed by Elon Musk's reusable rocket, right? So this is in 1989. Nearly 30 years ago they've got this. And let's look at this diagram, because one of the balls, which is the propulsion system, probably made of superconductor, at very low temperature, operating at a very low temperature. So the ball came out, right? So the ball was floating off the ground, bobbing about, and it was spinning. And special forces were told to go and retrieve it. They were given a big metal aluminium equipment case and told that they had to get the ball in the case. When they put it in the case, the lid opened like that. So in other words, it's causing something in its environment to accelerate without ejecting mass. These are the propulsion units that they've developed. And the special forces were told not to touch it, I suspect because it was very, very low temperature, because it's using superconductivity. And here's a diagram of it. Just incredible that they've got this technology. So it had wires sticking out the top, so that's its power supply. We don't know what the power system is in this craft, but as I say, a piece of cake to get something like that in space if you've got levitation. You know, you don't have any of the problems of re-entry, because you can put your craft up to a suborbital height, right? And as long as you can maintain that acceleration, you don't need to put it in orbit. So therefore getting it back is easy, because you're not whizzing around the Earth at extreme speed. And this is a diagram of Britain's most famous UFO case, drawn by Jim Penniston in 1980, 9 years before. Here is an artist's impression based on the evidence from Rendlesham. So I'm just going to compare an aerial view of the 1989 secret aircraft or spacecraft, right, with this rendition of Rendlesham. It has 3 faceted plates on each side of a triangle, identical to Rendlesham. It doesn't have a crew compartment in Rendlesham, so I would suggest that the Rendlesham craft could be a drone, an unmanned version of what we see in 1980, right? I do intend to get all of the witness statements analysed by Peter Hyatt, and if someone has been lying for a particular reason, they're going to be exposed. So when we see triangular craft depicted, and I've got dozens and dozens of reported sightings of these things, we always see them with 3 lights in the corner. But they're not lights. They are the propulsion system which might emit light during night as a byproduct of its operation. So it's just levitating there. There may be propulsion in the center as well. So as I say, some of these are 600 feet by 600 feet, TR-3B type craft, and it can just get into space totally silently, right? So I'm of the mind that they've got these platforms, you know, who knows, around the Earth doing whatever in secret. Now, late last year, there was a big story in the UFO community broke. Apparently, the Pentagon had been running a UFO study program for the last 10 years. And as a part of the disclosure, they released 2 videos of UFOs that had been filmed by fighter pilots. So they've recorded them in their cockpit. And these UFOs are going through incredible maneuvers that cannot be performed by a white world craft. So this has been trumpeted by ufologists as a disclosure of information. So this was one of the videos known as the gimbal video. There was another one called the Tic Tac video, where there was allegedly a fleet of these things. I'm not going to play them. You can go online and watch them. Now, the person who was in charge of this UFO study program at the Pentagon for the last 10 years was Pentagon intelligence officer Luis Elizondo. And the program was called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program. Now, he was interviewed on Coast to Coast by George Knapp recently. I normally like George Knapp's interviews. He covers ufology and other subjects. But his interview with Luis Elizondo, in my opinion, was woeful. I'm going to show you some clips from that interview, and I'm going to show you what I think is really going on with Luis Elizondo.
Most of the people he worked with in the Pentagon had no idea that this program existed. That included, as we just heard, his immediate supervisor. He didn't know that he had been given this assignment. You were doing a couple of different jobs, but one of them was studying UFOs.
That's correct. Yes, I mean at the very senior levels, they were aware of what I was doing. The problem is at the middle management level, not so much.
Right. So it's a problem to him that people around him didn't know he was involved in this. To me, that's just a convenient excuse for the fact that he didn't actually work in a UFO program. We've got no way of checking from any of his colleagues what he's saying. Now, he's asked about his role as an intelligence officer at the Pentagon, and when he's talking about it, he uses past tense verbs and he uses the pronoun I regularly. I do think he was a Pentagon intelligence officer, but as soon as he starts talking about his role in this UFO study program, his language changes.
You would have this flurry of reporting coming in, and that reporting could come in various ways. Sometimes you were up for 12 or even longer hours trying to analyze information and make phone calls and call meetings and have the experts try to do the telemetry. And in other cases, maybe it was you had time to sit back, drink a cup of coffee, and catch up on the news. So.
Right, so the sudden change in language to me suggests to me that he's lying about being involved in any UFO study program. I don't believe that any such program existed, but I do believe he is an intelligence officer, right? So that tells me that he's probably just a disinformation agent. So we then need to ask the question, why is he a disinformation agent? Why have they put him out?
Really, my mission was pretty clear-cut, and that was to determine with those of my colleagues, what is it we're seeing and how does it work? And then hopefully let smarter people figure out who's behind the wheel and what the intentions were. We're looking at something that does, basically extreme maneuverability, well beyond the healthy G-forces of anything biological to withstand inside.
Right, he's talking bollocks there. If you're using electrogravitics, you're generating a gravitational field yourself. You do not feel any gravitational force when you're going through a change in direction. Just like jumping off a building. If I jump off a building, right, and I'm weightless as I'm falling, if you suddenly move the earth from underneath me to above me, I will accelerate and go the other direction. But throughout the whole time, I won't feel any G-force, right? If you're using gravity as your propulsion system, your craft could go through any kind of movement and you wouldn't feel any G within the craft.
You're looking at hypersonic velocities. There's very few aircraft right now that we have that we are even aware of that can even achieve those speeds, let alone the low observability.
What he's describing here is secret technology.
Let alone potentially transmedium travel, and of course, positive lift, or some have said in the vernacular, anti-gravity. These are one of these exotic technologies would be a game changer.
No, it would be a game changer if people knew about it.
It would be a paradigm shift for any country. I look at it from the optic of if it's not ours, which is we're 99.999% sure it's not, but we are as close to being 100% sure as I think as anybody could be. The two things I said initially we were trying to focus on. One was what is it? The second is how does it work? Well, sadly we're not probably very much closer to figuring out what it is, but ironically enough, we are a heck of a lot closer to really understanding the physics and the principles of flight than we ever have been before. In fact, I think we finally may have cracked the code collectively on how this thing works.
So why have they put these videos out? I'm not suggesting these videos are man-made craft. No, I'm not. I don't know what they are. I've got no clue what these videos are. But I'm suggesting that he has been put forward by the Pentagon so that they have a reason to deny they have certain capabilities in their secret space vehicles. That's his function, to be able to deny secret technology, but without admitting it exists. Yeah? See how clever that is? So we're going to show a UFO video and go, "Bro, how the hell is that working? I've got no clue about that." Right? That's his role, in my opinion. And since he's left the Pentagon, he's become connected to the Tom DeLonge to the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. Can I not talk about this, please? Since I got no reaction there, I will. This guy's got a number of ex-intelligence people, military people, etc., who supposedly are giving him secret information about UFOs, etc. Now, that may well be the case, right? That may well be the case. But as far as I'm aware, none of those people have got access to government or military now, right? So it's a bit like somebody knocking at your front door, leaving a bag of goodies there, and then pissing off. You get the bag of goodies and you go, "Oh, look at this information, look at this, oh, wow, look at that." And you put your hand in there and you pull out a big turd. And you go, "Oh, it's not all good, wow, but still some good stuff in here. So then you open your door and you go, I need to speak to the person who put this bag there, and they've buggered off, right? So in other words, there's no channel back to the government. There's no two-way communication. It's just, there you go, have that, and you don't know what it is. That's what this guy's project is. So you don't know what's disinformation and what's not. There's no two-way communication with government or military or intelligence, right? So it's a perfect path to put out disinformation. So I'd just like to mention Andrew Johnson's new book, which he's about halfway through, called Finding the Secret Space Program. And we haven't really collaborated much. I've put this talk together. I looked at Andrew's first book. I haven't seen any of the content of this book yet, but we will be discussing it in upcoming Rich Planet shows. And Andrew and I are of similar mind in that we think that some secret technologies, the UFO explanation has been put on them in order to try and keep them secret. But we're not suggesting that there are no such things as UFO retrievals and that perhaps technology may have been recovered from them. This is the face on Mars, but they're also trying to keep archaeology on the Earth hidden. Very quickly, Alan Wilson wrote this book in 2007. This is a mound in South Wales, which Alan suggests represents the star Regulus, the brightest star in Leo. He gives us all of his reasons for that. So this was in 2007. He believes there's a very important artifact buried in here and has been there for thousands of years. He claims the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I know that there is something in there. I'd be surprised if it was the Ark of the Covenant, but I've spoken to the guy who did all the tests on there, so there is something in that mound. And Alan gives good reasons for suggesting that this mound is revering Regulus, the brightest star in Leo. I'll jump straight to the video. This is a standing stone which is unacknowledged by the archaeological organizations. It's about 7 feet high. That remind anyone of anything? Eye? Mouth? Mane? I'm going to show you a snout, mouth, eye, front leg, hind leg. So it's kind of a... So the guys who've been documenting this, they believe it represents a lion, sort of sphinx-like. But the incredible thing is this is 2,000 meters from that mound, and it's staring directly at the mound. It's perfectly aligned with the mound that Alan Wilson says represents Regulus of Leo the lion. Yeah, and to me this is suggestive that this is a lion. So there we go. We see the alignment here. So the twin Glog mound, that's it there, and this thing is perfectly in line with it. So I'm going to be covering a lot of this in future Rich Planet shows. I didn't have time to explain that fully. But just to finish, at the beginning, I said, I don't want to see any of this. I don't want to see any of this what can we do shit, right? I want to see less of this and more of this. Remember, believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard Hall. Thanks for coming. Thank you.